When we first moved down to Windella Farm from the city, it was a pretty cool tree change. The guy that I was working for at the time was on a dairy farm, and we were looking to buy a little bit of land, have some small animals like goats. We were thinking boa goats, and he said to me, Shane, the best way to make a little bit of money with meat is to start with a lot of money and you're going to end up with a little bit. Find a way to have regular income on your farm. So instead of meat goats, we went dairy goats. And what I'm going to show you here is 5 things that I really didn't know about dairy goats or goats in general before buying goats. Number 1, you have to treat them like livestock. The personalities on these animals are just crazy good. They're probably the most personality you're going to get out of any sort of livestock that you can get. So it's really simple to think of them like pets. Isn't that right, mate? So a lot of people will tend to let them in their yards, let them climb on their cars, let them climb on their tables, shit everywhere. It just doesn't work. They're livestock. You've got to treat them like that. One little good bit of an idea is to just treat them like cows, as little cows. You wouldn't let a cow in your house. You wouldn't let a cow in your car. So if you want to spend time with these animals, come to their spot, come out to their paddock, come out to their pasture and see them there. Like, you don't need to have them around your house. Have your house, have your farm, and trust me, you'll be happier at the end of it all, because these animals, they're pretty destructive if you don't treat them right. Isn't that right, Noah? This is Noah. He was one of the first goats that we got here. He's pretty old, actually. He's actually a wether. He came with the first lot of goats that we got, first lot of does that we got, and there's not too many of those does left here. He's outgrown pretty much all of them. We call him Noah for no nads, because he's a wether, no nads. Tied into number 1 is number 2, and that is fencing. It's all well and good for me to sit here and tell you to leave them in the paddock and you go to the paddock, but unless you've got a good fencing system that's going to keep those animals in their own paddocks, there's no point even telling you about that. We've got a pretty good system here. We've only ever had one goat get out, ever. That was the very first goat that we had. That was Rinny, the very first buck. He was a prize-winning buck, and we didn't have any other goats on the farm at that point. We brought him here. We got told, put him in a small pen, do your fencing, and you'll be right. So I spent probably 3 or 4 weeks building good fencing around, and I'll show you that fencing in just a second. But I spent ages getting this stuff ready. We put him out of the trailer, we put him in a paddock. Within 30 seconds, he jumped that fence, then he jumped the next fence, jumped the next fence, and then just ran and ran and ran. And about 3 or 4 days later, I got him. And we finally caught him in another farm. But the fencing that you have has to be goat proof. If you've just bought a farm or bought a hobby farm or whatever, it might be a little bit shaky right now because this fella here, he's rubbing up against the gate and it's probably shaking the camera. But what I was going to say is that if you've bought a farm and they've had other livestock there, like cattle are going to be held in pretty easily. Most farms around the place will have 1 strand, 2 strand, maybe 3 or 4 strands of wire. Might be hot fences in an electric fence, or it might be a barbed wire, but it's generally going to keep cows in. Goats are not like that at all. Let me show you the fencing that we have here. This here is pretty typical of what our fencing is. So we've got ring lock here. Ring lock is, what would you call it? Some people call it ring lock, some people call it hinge joint. In America, you've probably got some like sheep panels, or they're like an inch by inch squares here, and that works fairly well. But this is hinge joint. This stuff here, you can get ring lock. It's basically the same thing. Ring lock's a little bit stronger. Off the top of that, on this farm here, these 2 wires here, these are hot. So that's an insulated S. That's running an electric pulse through it. And down the bottom here, I've got an offset that's sitting about 30 centimeters off the ground, 12 inches or so off the ground, held out on this insulator here, and that goes all the way along that there. The idea of this is that the 2 top wires are going to stop the animal trying to jump the fence. The ring lock is going to stop them trying to go through the fence, and the offset down here, that's going to stop them trying to go under the fence. So the fencing is absolutely important. It's not just a matter of keeping these animals off your car and off your house and furniture and eating your garden. It's also keeping them in so that they don't run out onto roads and stuff and end up causing accidents and getting people hurt and getting them hurt. So fencing is really up there. You really need to have it up there. Number 3 is kind of linked into that, and that is when Rinny came here, the first thing he wanted to do was leave. And the reason that he wanted to leave was because he was the only one here. These animals are herd animals. Look at this. These two are stuck together because they're good mates. Now, these are both wethers. Like, these are young animals that we wanted to keep here. We use wethers here for a different reason. I'll explain that in another video. But these two fellas here, they're mates. So if I took him away, this one here wouldn't be too happy about that, and vice versa. The same with any other goat. They're herd animals. You must have more than one. We don't need 2 bucks here with the amount of does that we have, but yet over there's 2 bucks, and we keep them like that because they're mates. They're herd animals. When you see a goat tethered to something and it's using it as a lawnmower to eat out a bit of paddock or something, it's bloody terrible. Those animals are absolutely friggin' miserable. They're either going to be really sad or really, really angry, and you're never going to be able to deal with that animal. You'll never be able to walk up to an animal like that and give it a pat. They're going to want to hurt you because they're just prone to being stuck there and have a really bad attitude towards whoever did it to them. So they're herd animals. Take at least 2. We never, ever, ever sell 1 goat. If we ever sell goats, we sell them in multiples. Never, ever just 1. They're a herd animal. Never keep them alone. Number 4 is what you need to feed your goats. There is a myth around there, it's a huge myth, that goats will eat anything. Feed them tin cans, rubbish and all that sort of crap and they'll just eat it. That is so far from the truth, it's just unbelievable. I hear that sort of joke when we tell people about that we've got goats. We hear that all the time. Goats don't just eat everything. They'll explore things, absolutely, to find out what they are. They might even play with it a little bit. But goats, you need to, if they're working animals, as in you're breeding these for meat, you're breeding them for milk, anything like that, you've got to think of them as a performing animal, as in a high-performing animal. You need to put good energy into those animals to get that product out of them, whether it's meat or milk. So feeding them just crap, that's what you're going to get out of them, is just crap. These are not grazing animals, these are foraging animals. So they're going to eat the best little bit of that blade of grass. So you could have a patch of grass like this, look out behind me, there's plenty of feed for them there, and they're going to eat the best little bits of that grass from the tips of those leaves all day long. It's only when that stuff is gone and you no longer have that little sweet bits of leaf on the top of the grass that they're going to start eating the other stuff. We've had many occasions where we've fed them hay, fed them high and loosen. They'll eat what they want to eat. He's rubbing on the fence again. I should see if I can just pull this out and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. You funny little bugger. Have a look at this. Oh, he just finished rubbing on it. There's the camera setting up there and he's rubbing all over that gate. But what I was saying is we would feed them high energy feed, but they'll eat what they want to eat. They'll go off to the side there occasionally and just eat the worst bit of crappy grass on the side of the paddock that you could possibly find in that paddock. There's mozzies around this morning. So when we bring them into the dairy to milk them, they get fed pellets, and those pellets are a high energy pellet to keep that milk production up, and we use that milk for a number of things, and make sure you subscribe and you'll see what we use it all for. He's doing it again. So if we're all shaking here, it's his fault, not mine. You know, right, mate? Hey? But they will eat crap, they will eat leaves. On the opposite side to that, there are plenty of plants around this area, around where you are, that are absolutely poisonous to these animals. So be very mindful of what's in your area, do your own research, find what's poisonous to ruminant animals. These are ruminants. And if you've got them, get rid of them. It's going to bowl these boys over. Which leads us to number 5. Even though most of these animals, or all these animals, are herd animals, there's one over there, I don't know if you can see her, sitting over there in the grass on her own. That's Gloria. She's actually the first goat after Rinny that we got. That Noah, she came with Noah. And her and maybe another 4 or 5 animals came together. She's got one horn. We call her the unicorn. She was disbutted pretty badly way back in the beginning. Because she's got one horn, she's a bit of a bitch. And none of the other animals like her, so she sits over there on her own. She's a bit of a bully. She like knocks into these other ones with her horn and they just stay away from her. Some animals you can have the horns and it won't matter. They won't bother anyone else. But she does. She's good with us, but with the other goats we've seen her knock them around a fair bit. So in saying that, if we took her out of this paddock and had her on her own, she wouldn't be happy. The last one is really the health on these animals. Everywhere around the world you're going to have different diseases that are really bad for goats. Here in Australia we've got CAE, which is like a arthritic sort of a disease, and Johne's as well, which is like a wasting disease. Every animal that we've ever brought onto this farm has been blood tested for both of those diseases. Those two things will absolutely ruin your herd. They'll decimate your herd. So we bring them in, blood test them before we bring them in. And before we sell them, we encourage people to go ahead and get those tests done as well. We're quite comfortable that what we've got here is quite safe. Aside from, and that will be different all around the world. You're probably going to have those two diseases all around the world, in most places around the world, so be mindful of that. If you might have, say, 60 animals here, you go and find another one, you rescue one or something like that, and they've got Johne's. That's it. It's going to decimate your herd, so be very mindful of that. Alongside that, there's also all the parasites that will come from pasture grazing your animals. If you overstock your paddocks, you're going to end up more than likely getting a worm burden on your animals. When we had a lot of animals on our farm, we had a worm problem and we would need to drench our animals every single year, sometimes twice a year. And the way that you would do that is you go and get some turds, some shit, some manure, some feces, whatever you want to call it, from your paddocks, go and get some of that, take it to your vet and get a count done. And they'll tell you what sort of worms you've got. They'll tell you what sort of drench to treat them with. Once you've done that, drench your animals, give it a couple of weeks, do another fecal count, so go and get some more shit, take it to the vet, they'll see if the drench has worked. That's the best practice to do that. And I would encourage you to do that for the first couple of years that you have your animals. That way you know the drenching system that you have in place works. Alongside that, you don't want to keep on using the same drench year in, year out, because the worms will build a tolerance to that drench and the drench will end up stop working. So do that drenching in accordance with what the vet recommends. There are lots of Facebook groups out there about goats and how to breed goats and how to care for your goats, but the best people around, in my opinion, are going to be your local vets. Go and ask your local vets what sort of problems that you've seen with the goats in the area, and they'll adjust what you're doing accordingly. It's starting to rain a little bit now. Another thing with goats, just before I finish, is that there goes Hodor. We name all of our goats, and I'll explain why he's called Hodor maybe in another video. There's a lot of people saying around goats that they absolutely hate water and they hate getting wet, and that's true. And we used to put them in sheds, we used to keep them out of the rain. Starting to rain a bit now, they've all moved along now, they've all moved off into a group. They'll go down the front and they'll sit underneath the tree, and that'll keep them out of the rain fairly well. But you don't necessarily need to build kick-ass shelters for your goats. They'll look after themselves pretty well. It's going to depend on where you are in the world though. If it's cold and it's wet, look after your animals. Where we are here, I'm sitting at probably about 15 or 16 degrees Celsius here this morning. It's not that cold. Actually, it's not cold at all. There's no wind, a little bit of rain. The goats are fine, they're more than happy. Anyway, I'm going to get out of the rain now because I don't like getting wet either. Anyway, see you next time. Catch you.